Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Harmony Weinberg, and I'm the Communications Manager for the Edmonds School District. And tonight's Community Forum is an update on our reentry plans for the Edmonds School District. I just want to go over our agenda right now. So first up, we're going to have a welcome message from Dr. Balderas, our superintendent. Next, Amanda, if you want to advance the slide. We'll go over the stages of reentry, and we'll have a full update on what those stages look like. Next, we'll go over the building plans and the requirements that are going to be needed for buildings to open. And then we're going to have health requirement update. And then we will have some childcare information that we're going to share with everyone as well. And then we're going to read off and answer your questions. And we do appreciate everyone who filled out the Google form and shared their questions. And we will address many of those this evening. So right now, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Balderas.
Thanks, Harmony, and I really appreciate everybody being on. I think we have close to 650 folks on this webinar. And our three goals right now, again, are to really get our three goals in front of us are to, number one, get our stage one students back in our schools. And our stage one are roughly 160 kids spread out over a variety of campuses. I believe we're up to 10 campuses for those 160 kids. And these are kids that have been our students that are on special programs, our deaf and hard of hearing, medically fragile, developmental kindergarten kids. They need to be in our schools because we need to service them in our campuses, and that's what they need right now. Number two is really to put our efforts into stage two reopening. And that's our kindergarten, first, and second grade kids. And that right now is slated for mid-November. And again, this is a very fluid situation. So I sent out an email today to folks that the current numbers we received today from the health authority was that we're over 70 cases per 100,000. So that continues to trend up. Of course, we will not open if that continues to trend up. But again, we need to prepare for reopening. And that's something that we're going to continue to review and get the guidance from our health authority, Dr. Spitters, the county health officer. And number three, make sure we continue to make remote learning the best learning we can for our kids. Before we can move forward in any of these stages, we have to, of course, work with all of our associations that have building personnel to ensure that we have the proper working conditions for them to do their job safely. We have received almost 300 questions from families since Thursday and who filled out the Google form, and we hope to answer some of those today, but also we will be updating our webpage with the Q&A for folks. I want to reassure you that we've not forgotten that we're in this global pandemic, and to know that we want our kids back, and our staff are working as hard as they can with our remote practice, our teaching and learning that we have now. I know it's not easy for folks, especially for the youngest kids. That's why we're working to bring our K-1-2s when it's safe to do so, for both kids and for our staff. Our priority is to keep again our kids, families, and staff healthy as we navigate this crisis. There's a lot of unknowns that will continue. And we'll make the best decisions we can with the information we have. Again, I urge you to be patient. I know this is very, very difficult. We're being as cautious as we can following the guidance from our health authority. This is fluid and ever changing. Again, when I first arrived about 3 months ago, I fully expected to start in a hybrid format to begin the school year. We quickly morphed to fully remote and have been working toward the variety of stages. And again, we were trending downward, but now we're trending back upward. And that's a concern. It is a concern because again, we want our kids and staff, they need to be safe. So it's that balance of how much information we have and again, making the best decisions with that information. So I appreciate your commitment to us. And again, I just ask for patience as we work through this. This is incredibly difficult for us to be able to navigate through. And again, we'll be nimble as we continue throughout the school year. And I want to thank you for everything that you do for our community, for your kids being on our campuses at home, and for our staff that are working really hard right now. I know this is a heavy lift, and I want to do just a big shout out to our teaching staff, to our principals, to our paras, to all our classified folks that are working with our kids right now. This is very difficult today. Again, appreciate your dedication. Turn it over back to Harmony.
All right, thank you. And right now I'm going to hand it over to Assistant Superintendent Dana Gieslin.
Great, thank you, Harmony. I'd like to start off tonight with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Snohomish people, and their successors, the Tulalip tribes, who since time immemorial have taken care of, hunted, fished, and gathered on these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and the water. By acknowledging these homelands, we commit to working with tribal nations to further the educational aims they have identified in our classrooms and our schools. Next slide. Additionally, today is Indigenous Peoples Day, October 12th. This day had previously been recognized as Columbus Day, but has recently been reclaimed as Indigenous Peoples Day to celebrate and acknowledge the fact that Native people are the first inhabitants of the Americas and that their ancestors have been here since time immemorial. Next slide. All right, we're going to get started tonight, and we're going to briefly go over our proposed, and I say proposed because, as Dr. Balderas referenced, that these stages are fluid, and we will respond to recommendations from OSPI, our governing body, and to the Department of Health. So these are our stages of reentry into our schools. Next slide. This is shared out. This was shared out to all of you, our constituents, and also on our website. And this is a general overview of our stages. And we are in current fully remote. We're in continuous learning 2.0, and then we work through these 4 stages of reentry until we're fully reopened. We do not have a time frame for all of these stages. It will really, really depend on how this pandemic plays out and what the recommendations are, again, from the Department of Health at the state level, Snohomish County Health, and OSPI. Next slide. We're going to go specifically through each stage, and then of course we'll take questions about the stages at the end. So right now we are in a fully remote learning. All students are served in fully remote, with the exception of a few contracted placements for some special education students and some students who are receiving some on-site services at Snow Isle Technical. And this is continuous learning 2.0. We were in continuous learning in the spring, and that was fully remote. As you know, we had an emergency shutdown and we went to a continuous learning, and we're in this continuous learning model 2.0 right now. Next slide. So our reentry stage 1. All general education students are served still in a fully remote setting. Some special education services will be in person, and we're following Department of Health, LNI, and OSPI guidance. What's new to this stage is we are moving, we will be offering for about 163 students. Some may opt in to fully remote learning, but about 163 students at 10 different sites. There are some students that are receiving special education services, and we have done our research and looked into why and who to serve first. And our students that have not been able to fully access to the level we would like, remote services, we are offering some services in stage 1. Stage 1 is a small start. We're ramping this up really slowly. We want to make sure we get it right. There's lots of things to get into place. And again, it's the 10 sites, approximately 163 students. There could be less that actually come to school, but it's kind of this first start for us to get students in person. Many districts around us are in stage 1. They may be calling it something different, but they are serving some mostly self-contained programs, students receiving special education services at this stage. Next slide. Stage 2. So new to this stage, of course, all of the students who are already being served in person in stage 1, but new to this stage would be kindergarten through 2nd grade in an AABB hybrid model. And that would still have Wednesdays being a fully remote day. We would also be adding Alderwood Early Childhood Center, a hybrid there, and it would be for about 20 students in also an AABB model. And EL newcomers or English learners and a newcomer center for them to receive some services. And then a district site where students who are experiencing homelessness could access some services and some supports for for either technology access and support for their classes and those kind of things. Next slide. Reentry stage 3. What's new to this stage, of course, everything that was happening before, any students that were on site, but what we're adding is now our K6 are receiving some in-person services. So K2 would be in-person 4 days a week, so that's an increase. Grades 3 through 6 would be an AABB model hybrid, also still with Wednesdays as a asynchronous day. And so K6 would be in person. And then increased preschool days at Alderwood Early Childhood Center, and then also some increased special education programs and services. Next slide. Reentry stage 4. So new to this stage is our secondary students are joining into in-person services. So grades 7 through 12 would be an AABB hybrid. And then also some additional days for some of our special education programs. It could be more often that they are being served. And our K2s are still coming in person 4 days a week. So total in this stage is grades 3 through 12 are in a hybrid and K2 is 4 days a week. And next slide. And once we move out of stage 4, it will be in a fully reopened setting. Do we know when that's going to be? We do not. We do not have dates, again, going back to that fluidity. Also, but at some point, we will be, with the Department of Health's recommendations, with all the safety protocols and precautions that we are putting into place, all of our schools will be, at some point, operating in person and full-time. And Harmony, back to you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Dana. So right now we're going to go over building plans. And so I'm going to hand it over to Assistant Superintendent Greg Schwab and Director of Facilities Operations, Matt Finch.
Thank you, Harmony, and good evening, everyone. Matt Finch and I are going to talk a little bit about the specific plans that we have in place to ensure that when we open our buildings, we do so in a safe manner. Following recommendations from the health department, following recommendations from our health services team to make sure that physically we're able to open our buildings safely. So all of our buildings are going to complete a building reopening checklist plan. And so each building is going to be required to go through and ensure that in each of these areas, they are making sure that their buildings meet the requirements that we've established for each of these areas. And so we will all of our buildings, know what all of our buildings need. After we have done that, we then want to focus specifically on the following areas. One of the first things I focus on is transportation, specifically for how students are going to arrive at school and then how they're going to leave school. So after we've done that, then our next step will be to look at our classrooms and make sure that each of our classrooms has the right amount of desks and so that we can socially distance students within the classrooms. And then one of the last areas that I'll talk about before I hand it off to Matt is movement and access. We want to make sure that each of our buildings has a plan for how students are going to move through the building, how they're going to walk to class, how they're going to exit class, how they're going to get to and from lunch. All of those things are things that we need to help our buildings think about because, again, there are very specific things we need to make sure are in place to help our students transit throughout the building. So now I'm going to ask Matt to speak to these last areas.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So yeah, moving on to food services, we're of course working collaboratively with our food service department and looking to figure out how that wants to best fit within the school setting, whether that's eating in classrooms or eating in the cafeteria like many buildings typically do. So with, as Greg mentioned, with a focus on social distancing, really trying to be mindful about cleaning up before and after food service occurs, and that's both of course for breakfast and lunch. Recess has been a big talking point, and really focusing on how we can work with building administrators to schedule recess times to, again, maintain social distancing, the proper activities that can occur out on open fields. We are currently planning on keeping our playground structures closed, but that is an ongoing discussion that we'll continue to assess. Health and containment rooms. We are working, of course, hand in hand with our health services team to identify areas within the building for to take students and or staff if needed, but more importantly, students to a safe, contained area if they are experiencing symptoms until either parents can be informed and or come and pick up their child. Restrooms are, we are planning on cleaning restrooms regularly, at least a few times a day. And we are, of course, with social distancing in mind, making sure that only a handful, well, depending on the size of the restroom, that only one, maybe two, maybe three tops students would be in a restroom at any given time, and working with building administrators on how to manage, that process. The main office and public spaces, buildings are going to still be relatively closed to the public for, as we start off these first couple stages, but that we've hopefully put in devices, whether it's, intercom devices out front or something simple as a doorbell on some of the sites, to make sure that you are able to get a hold of somebody when you access a building, or when you have a need to, speak to somebody in the building. The main offices are outfitted with plexiglass screens. We are asking that as much of the interaction that would occur would be on, on a scheduled basis. So, and then to, making sure that we got kids in mind with safety drills. We are still required to conduct safety drills. And so we will be going and working with staff on how to plan for, whether it's an earthquake drill or other types of drills like that. How do we do that in a COVID environment? And I think that is kind of the relatively high level plan for what we focus on for buildings. Harmony?
Thank you so much. Right now, we want to focus on health and what that looks like for in-person learning. And I do want to just let participants know we do have over 800 of you joining us tonight. We want to thank you for being here, for getting this information that so we'll get right now to our health questions.
Thank you, Harmony. It's Mara Marano Bianco. I'm the Program Manager for Student Health Services. Accompanying me this evening is Cindy Gorgon, who is our nurse on special assignment. So I'm actually going to pass the first slide on to Cindy, who's going to talk a little bit about what is required for in-person learning.
Good evening. Thanks, Mara. I'm Cindy Gergen, and I, as Mara said, a nurse on special assignment. So the first part we want to talk about is what is required for in-person learning. And it's important for us to remember is that even while we're in person, we still have to do our basics with making sure that our students are in compliance with their immunizations according to what Washington State school entry requirements are. There was a new state law that was initiated on August the 1st that no longer allows a 30-day conditional status for students to start. So what this means for families is that we need all of the required documentation for your students, and we will require medically verified records prior to starting in person. We also need our students with life-threatening health conditions to have those requirements met. We will need their health information paperwork completed and received. If your student has medication or treatment needs at school, we'll need those medication or treatment authorization orders from your licensed healthcare provider. We'll need those medications and treatments on site, and a nursing healthcare plan that would be written by your building school nurse. And Mara, back to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So, as we know, the best way to prevent illness is to reduce your risk of being exposed to a virus. And so, this is a great graph from Harvard, which indicates what it would look like, our cases would look like without preventative measures, and what our cases would look like with protective measures in place. And you can see the numbers are very different. Hand hygiene is a large part of our preventative measures. Frequent hand washing and hand sanitizing will be available throughout the building to be able to help reduce our and mitigate our transmission of risk. As well, facial coverings are very important. All students and staff must wear a facial covering that covers their nose and mouth when in the building. In rare circumstances, when a face cloth covering cannot be worn or the proper PPE, staff and students may use clear face coverings or face shield with a drape. If used, these face shields should extend below the chin to the ears and have no gaps at the forehead to protect and mitigate the amount of virus. Those that are not able to wear an alternative must work with their healthcare provider for medical documentation on how to move forward. Now, in regards to following social distancing guidelines, Matt and Greg Schwab had indicated some of the techniques that we're using to be able to keep social distancing at bay, and that is making sure we don't have large number of students in each classroom, looking at the way that we move within our buildings, and also in regards to how we will be handling some of our activities within the learning environment. And all of these mitigation measures together offer what we call a layering approach to really lower the risk of transmission. Cindy, I'll pass it on to you for the next slide.
All right, so part of the return to school that is going to be required for students, all of your students, is to do a daily attestation. And this is a daily health screening that you are completing at home, families and guardians, attesting that your student does not have a fever, that they do not have any COVID-like symptoms. And this would be completed every morning. And these symptoms are in accordance with the Snohomish Health District guidelines. This will be completed electronically through a digital platform called Qualtrics. This is the same company that the intent survey is being utilized through. Upon arrival, school nurses and supporting staff will make sure that those attestations have been completed. And if they have not, then the students that need follow-up, we will be doing so. If a student is not able to be at school after having gone through that screening, we will be calling parents and guardians to come pick up your student. And just as a note, these are all based on Snohomish Health District guidelines. And Amanda, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these questions here at the very top of the box, those are the questions and symptoms that are COVID-like. Now, we all recognize that these symptoms are not necessarily specific to just COVID-19, but these are the screening questions that we are being asked to utilize per health district guidelines. If you or your student has any of these, if your student, has any of these symptoms that are in line with the COVID-19 symptoms, we will ask that they remain at home. And you can see there's a graphic there that we've put together that has the recommendations. And Mara will speak to page 2 with if a student has symptoms of specific to COVID on the next slide.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah. So basically, what happens if a student presents with symptoms at school? Well, we know that this could be a very possibility. So if any student begins to exhibit any of the COVID-like symptoms while at school, they will be escorted and remain in what we are lovingly calling the containment room, where building school nurse and or designated staff member will be there to assist them, observe them, and make sure that their condition isn't becoming worse. A parent or guardian or an emergency contact at that point will need to be contacted to come and pick up their students. Students will not at that point be permitted to go through the building. They will have to remain within the containment room until they have been picked up by their parent, guardian, or emergency contact. So this is a quick reminder that we have found in our database that there's a number of families where we don't have an active email address or telephone number for your student. So please work with your school building to make sure we have the most up-to-date information on how to contact you. The other thing is students will not be permitted to ride on district transportation home if they are exhibiting symptoms at school, because we just don't know at that point if that could possibly be COVID. Staff caring for the students will wear the proper protective equipment, including masks, gloves, and gowns, to make sure that they themselves will not be exposed to the virus. And then students will be referred to their healthcare provider for possible follow-up regarding their symptoms and testing to make sure that it is in fact not COVID-19. The students will be allowed to return to school, specifically according to the guidance of Snohomish County. So if we can move the slide. So some of the guidelines currently from Snohomish Health District is that if a staff or student presents with at least one of the following COVID-19 symptoms, those indicated above, must immediately go home. They are able to return to school after a positive COVID test, where they, though, have remained at least 10 days at home, and they have had relief of fever for 24 hours, and their symptoms are improving. To return to school after a negative COVID-19 test, we need to make sure that they are fever-free for 24 hours and that their symptoms are improving. And then to return to school, if no COVID-19 test is performed, they must at least stay home for 10 days after symptom onset and at least 24 hours after the fever has resolved and symptoms have improved. Now, we recognize we're moving into flu season, and a lot of the same measures that we have indicated here in regards to protective measures will also work for flu. So we're hoping that we will mitigate both COVID and flu with these efforts. I now pass it back to Harmony.
Thank you, Mara. All right, now we're going to have an update on childcare from Dr. Helen Jung, who is one of our assistant superintendents.
Thank you, Harmony. Good evening, everyone. I just want to give you a quick update on what childcare is going to look like through the various stages. And tonight I'm going to be going over stage 1 and stage 2. So next slide. So reentry stage 1 childcare looks like this. Right now, we have YMCA servicing our students in Chase Lake, Right at School at Cedar Valley and Cedar Way, Boys and Girls Club at the Alderwood Boys and Girls Club, their own site, and Kids Crew, Mountain Lake Terrace Parks and Rec. They're supporting kids at Terrace Park Elementary and also their own Mountain Lake Terrace Pavilion. So in stage 1, there will be no changes to current childcare practices. So we're going to do everything exactly the way we're doing it currently for stage 1. But things significantly start shifting when we get into stage 2. So next slide. So stage 2 reentry triggers a lot of changes. And so we're going to continue our partnerships with Right at School, YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, and also Kids Crew. But when students K2 start returning hybrid AABB reentry, there will not be any full day childcare in our buildings. Instead, it'll look very much like a pre-COVID times where there were AM and PM childcare in our elementary schools, but only on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays because of the AABB schedule. Full day childcare will exist, however, at former Alderwood Middle School and also Woodway Elementary School, Monday through Friday. So there's going to be more to come on this and a lot more details, and we're going to be making announcements very soon on which childcare providers will provide their services at former Alderwood Middle School and also Woodway Elementary. But I just wanted all of our families to know that the shift really happens in stage 2. Everything remains the same in stage 1. Back to you, Harmony.
All right. Thank you, Helen. And again, we want to thank all the 830 of you joining us tonight for this community forum here on the webinar. And then we have over 100 people on YouTube right now. We've gathered a lot of questions. We appreciate everyone who took the time to share their questions with us now. We have about 90 questions so far coming in, and we've gathered almost 300 through our Google form that went out. So we want you to know that tonight, obviously, we're not going to be able to get through all of those questions, but we really want to address what we can, and we will continue to update our frequently asked questions page. That document or that web page is updated often because, as you are all aware, information continues to change pretty much by the day or some days by the minute. So one of the questions that we've seen a lot of, and a lot of people have questions about, is the student intent form. So I'm going to hand it over to Assistant Superintendent Dana Giesland to talk a little bit about the reasoning for the student intent form, the requirement from families to fill that out for each student as well, and what that means if families change their mind. So Dana, can you address that, please?
Yes. So this is a difficult time to make a choice. We realize that for families, and the variables keep changing. So we're asking that you look at what you have in front of you and what you know. And if we were starting school tomorrow, whether you would, with all the precautions that we just talked about, all the things that Matt and Greg talked about as far as facilities, and then all the things that Mara and Cindy also spoke to, the health precautions and those kind of things, and give us a good indication of whether you would be sending your child in person or choosing the fully remote, to the best of your ability. What that allows us to do is then make some plans. As you can imagine, right now we have thousands of responses from our families, and which we'll be following up on. Anyone we haven't heard from, we'll be following up on to make sure that we hear your voice. So we need to know that, so we can then look at how many people are opting in to 100% remote learning, and then staff that appropriately. And then how many people are in whatever in-person learning, whatever it looks like, and staff that appropriately as well. There are many things that come into play, of course. And I saw some questions in the chat, so I'll just kind of go for it here. And if Helen and Greg want to jump in as well. So not only is it will there be a shuffling of sorts, we can't guarantee that your child would have the teacher that they currently have. So they opted into 100% remote, their teacher might change. We just don't know until we get all of those responses back. Secondly, our teachers have done a form and indicated what their preference is, but also some of our teachers may qualify for some leaves and some different kind of things, and won't be able to do in person for a variety of reasons that are done by our Human Resources Department. So this is a really difficult decision and to navigate through all of this. So we're asking for some input so that we can start planning. And I defer to Helen and Greg if there's any other thoughts on that, but most districts have reached out to their families and said, hey, what's your plans? What are you thinking? And then I know that you don't have every single variable in front of you. So it's kind of, with the information right now, what are you thinking that you're going to do? Greg, did you have something else?
You beat me to it. I was going to reiterate that point, that really what we're asking for is your best guess based on what you know today, and we know full well that these things are going to change. And so with what you know today, please let us know what your thinking is, knowing that it's going to change, and we anticipate that. So we realize there's a lot that's going to happen between now and when we really do reopen, especially for secondary, because we know secondary is quite a ways down the road in terms of when we might be thinking about bringing those students back. But it really does help us to plan, because we cannot make staffing decisions until we know how many students we're going to have in remote and in person. And at the same time, we also need to be doing this work with our staff. So please give us your best guesstimate today, and we'll work from there.
There's another question that has come up quite a bit in the chat, and when people submitted questions prior to tonight, and it was about whether you have to opt into remote for the whole year. And we asked again for your best guess on that, but we will see if there could be times that we check that again during the year, which at time intervals that makes sense, right? It could be at grading periods, it could be at semester, those kind of things, and then we'll evaluate whether that if someone opted into 100% remote and then maybe at a grading period we would see what that looked like, and we might be able to then reevaluate because someone might be ready to come back to in-person instruction at a natural time.
All right, thank you both. And just an update on the student intent form. We have had over half of our students, 56%, we do have that information. So if, as Dana and Greg both said, we really need that information. So if you have that, received your form to fill that out for each of your students, the sooner you can do that, the better it helps with our planning. Right now, I want to turn it over to Dr. Balderas for a question that we've received quite a bit of. Dr. Balderas, it is, why is there such a focus on getting our students physically back in the classroom? What about focusing on just the learning part?
I think it's a combination of both. I think we need to be doing both as educational institutions, and we are doing that. I think for stage one, again, these are the kids that are needing some services on our campuses. Again, our deaf and hard of hearing students, medically fragile students, developmental kindergarten. These are kids that need to come in. We have a lot of students also that are unhoused. We have roughly 600 students that are classified that have received McKinney-Vento services, meaning that they are unhoused, that need some additional support. So I think out of the almost 22,000 kids that we have a lot of kids that need additional supports. Again, and our kindergarten kids, we want them on campus if possible. Our first grade kids, if possible. I know that this is a struggle for some families as well. We've had some connectivity issues in the past, in the spring, and we have families that struggle with multiple students being at home with limited Wi-Fi or internet connections. So I think this is for the almost the 22,000 kids that we have in Edmonds. So I'm speaking for 22,000 kids. Not everybody has the connections at home that maybe some of us have. So again, I think some of this has worked well for kids and some of this has not worked well for kids. So I think we need to focus on both the promoting and engaging in remote learning better, but also we need to start thinking about getting our kids back, our North Stars. I mean, we have kids right now that are wanting to come back and need to come back. So again, it's focusing on both, Harmony.
All right, thank you. This next question is for Matt. How will you guarantee that the school will be properly sanitized and clean for staff and students each day when in remote? Are you going to be hiring more custodians for the buildings? And maybe you can start out, Matt, with stage one and then moving forward into the different stages and how that might look.
Yeah, thanks for setting that up, Harmony. We are on a very focused path to keep the building safe and sanitized. Our custodial crews, we will move around the district as needed to focus on the areas of stage reopening as needed. We are not currently planning on hiring additional custodial support, but we feel pretty confident that we can provide the service that's needed with the staff that we have.
Thanks, Matt. Mara and Cindy, I'm going to turn to you both for this one. We're getting a lot of questions about these younger students in our district and the masks. And a lot of people seem to be concerned about how these students are going to keep their masks on. How are we going to be able to maintain that safety requirement? And what will happen if students aren't able to keep their masks on?
A great question, Harmony. I think the first thing is to really start at home and help to start conditioning and make it a habit for your students and children to start wearing a mask on a regular basis. I have been in other environments where you are seeing in childcare facilities, because we do host childcare facilities here on site, and these children, much younger to much older, are able to maintain a mask on a regular basis. So we are seeing that the capacity for most children is there. We do recognize, however, that there are going to be those special situations where we may have, children who may have difficulty wearing a mask. And then we will need to have those dialogues because it is a requirement. And there are alternatives such as face shields as opposed to a mask that a student can wear. And or we may have to have further dialogue with your physician if this is the best environment for your student to be in, if they have to be unmasked. Cindy, do you have any additional pieces to that?
I just want to add a little bit more to the face shield comment, because I think this face shield, according to the Department of Health, is very specific that it has to have a drape so that the airflow is enclosed, as opposed to just a plastic shield with no mask. You will see in some situations in higher risk that staff would need to wear a face shield with a mask, but if a student is using a face shield with a drape, that's what the approved alternative is. So it's the drape that goes right down to the shoulders, and there's no gaps whatsoever.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you both. The next question I want to talk a little bit about. We're getting the question a lot about the daily attestation form, and just for our community, the attestation form is basically a health form. It's saying you're attesting, you're committing, you're confirming that your student does not have these symptoms or does have these symptoms. And so one thing that people want to know a lot about are, okay, so we have to fill that out every day, but what about a daily temperature check? Are we doing that? Why or why not? So Mara and Cindy, I'll send that one back to you.
Thanks, Harmony. Yes, so the attestation sheet does indicate whether your child has a fever. So the expectation is that you will be doing your child's temperature at home and completing that as part of the attestation process. Now, we do recognize that there could be some students that arrive that may require a second screening and or temperature check, which we will be prepared and are in the process of devising very detailed process for that when they do come to school. Cindy, any additional?
No, I don't think so. I think, we have to also remember that temperature checking is one aspect of COVID. And so I think attesting to all of those symptoms, that's why it is such a broad range of symptoms, is that, that's one small piece is a temperature check. And so we know that there's other ways that other districts are doing this, but in terms of wanting parents to be involved in this process, that's a huge basis on the attestation.
And I think it's also important for people to know that fever typically is a later symptom of the stage of COVID. It's not one of the earlier signs of COVID. So we are looking for some of those earlier symptoms first, but it is important to take a temperature check on a daily basis.
Great, thank you both. And so we talked a little bit too. I know Mara and Cindy, I'm calling on you a lot, but we do have a lot of health questions that people have, a lot of great questions. So we talked a little bit about the screening process. So there's going to be the attestation form or the daily health check form for each student. And then we also have a list of those symptoms and what you should do, or if you've been in contact with someone. So for children, and Dana, this might be you and Greg and Helen popping in here, but for children who are required to quarantine for 14 days, are they going to be able to have remote instruction? Are they going to be sick days? Or how is learning going to happen when it's one student or possibly a full classroom that has to quarantine for 14 days, and what that would look like?
Well, I'll jump in. This is Greg Schwab. So I think, again, it depends on the situation, but if we have a whole classroom that needs to quarantine, those students and that teacher would most likely move back into remote learning again for the period of time that they're in quarantine. So yeah, I think that's probably the simplest answer to that question. I think if it's an individual student and let's say they were just sick, maybe they had the flu or something else, but it wasn't COVID, and that student had to miss school because of an illness, they would be, anytime a student is sick now, they make requests for homework for their teachers, and teachers provide them with work while they're out of school. So again, based on what we're dealing with, that's how I think we would handle those situations.
Great, thank you. A lot of the questions coming in are about hybrid, and Dana, I'm hoping you can help answer this one, but a lot of the questions, and we might not have the answers now, and I think that's important to address. A lot of families are concerned from if they decide to go hybrid versus fully remote, their student would be in person for 2 days and then fully remote for 3, and what that instruction would look like on those 2 days. I think everyone understands that Wednesday is the way it is now, and it would be that way when we are able to have in person. But I think some families are concerned about what those 2 other days that currently they have a pretty normal schedule with their teacher, like on Zoom, and what that would look like if their student again is in school 2 days a week, and then those 3 days they're out of school, and what that might look like.
So we did a lot of work on this prior to deciding to go 100% remote. So we had many 20 plus work groups on this in the summer working on this and what that could look like. So right now, our students are in some synchronous learning and then some asynchronous learning. So going to a hybrid model flips it to in person for 2 days, right? And then the asynchronous is the other 3 days. And so it is a shift, but we do have our kids in front of us. So it makes it different. And I think most people could agree that having students, I was a teacher, and many people on the call either are or have been teachers. I would love to have my kids as much as possible in front of me, right? There's so many things that we can do. I think about social emotional learning. I think about some of those critical things that just really are so hard to do remotely. So it is, while we want to have all the safety and health precautions and protocols in front of us first, that's why our desire to get kids in front of us when it's safe to do so. So that said, and I'll let Helen jump in here a little bit too, but we do have some ideas around schedules, and we're in bargaining with our teacher and ESA union. So, it's a collaboration between us and our bargaining groups, but also it's about getting our kids in front of us some, and then having established asynchronous learning and that more independent learning that kids do outside of us that we set them up for. Helen, did you have a couple other thoughts on that?
Well, I just want to reiterate the fact that, our teachers we need to come to the table with our teachers to really collaborate and get a sense of what those days would look like. But yes, they are asynchronous. And yes, the 2 days prior to that, for example, if you're an AA student, Monday, Tuesday, for example, you're in person with your teacher, and then you get a lot of direction and a lot of feedback. And then the other days you are doing assignments and check-ins and whatnot. So I feel like it's not going to be remote learning in isolation when it comes to the Thursday and Friday part, but it'll be an extension of the FaceTime that they already had Monday and Tuesday. And just speaking of hybrid, I just wanted to add, I saw a few questions about childcare and what that looks like for hybrid. So for example, let's say that and I saw a question about, well, I have kids at Cedar Way doing childcare right now, and if I choose hybrid, what would that do? Well, that means your child would possibly get at your neighborhood school, if you chose remote and if you're AA, you would have options to have AM and or PM childcare at your neighborhood school where your child attends. On the other days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, yes, you would not have childcare at Cedar Way. You would either choose from services at former Alderwood Middle School or Woodway Elementary. And families have a choice because they will be 2 different providers at those different sites, those 2 sites. So yes, you would not continue the during the day childcare as you are now in phase 2. In stage 1, everything's the same, just like now. As soon as kids go into AABB hybrid K-2 grades, that's when the shift happens. Just wanted to clarify that. But for example, if you are a student and you're getting childcare at Cedar Way, for example, right now, but you are choosing full remote, you're not looking into any kind of hybrid situation, you're going to finish out the year in full remote. What that would mean is that you would have childcare during the day at former Alderwood Middle School or Woodway, not like you are right now when we move into stage 2. Back to you, Harmony.
All right, thank you. I do want to give just a few updates. I know we have a little bit of time left, but some of our families have not received their student intent form. We're asking you to contact your school so that we can get that information from you. And just a reminder that the email address on your student's Skyward account on Skyward Family Access, it's the primary email. So if there's a few people in the account, make sure the person who's listed as primary that person is checking their email, because they will get a link for that student that has a specific form for that student. If you have multiple students, you will receive a form for each one of your students. So I just want to reiterate, if you have not received that, please contact your school. And then I also wanted to recap again, just for folks who might have come a little later, is that we are really focused as a district on stage 1. And again, that is a small population of students, about 160 spread over 10 school sites. I know the district, we might have said 8 earlier today, but it is 10, and I want to just make that clear. And that is our focus. And as Dr. Balderas mentioned at the beginning of the call, or at the beginning of the forum, that numbers of COVID are rising, and we've received the latest from Snohomish County Health District. And so we will continue to work with them, and we will continue to make all of our district decisions with health authority as our focus. And we just want to, again, reiterate that. So I would just ask now, Dr. Balderas, if you want to say anything before we close out.
No, again, I think there's just a lot of unknowns yet, and we just have to be nimble because the information is fluid. And again, this keeps changing, and it's going to continue to change. And we're doing the best we can with the information we have. So I ask for your patience. Again, our number one goal right now is work on stage 1 and do stage 1 well for the neediest kids. Take our time, see how the trend is going, and see if we can get to stage 2. Again, at some point in time, we will be in stage 2. So we need the information for folks to be able to send us your intent, and knowing full well that there's going to be some movement there as well. I know that across the Seattle area, there's districts in a variety of different stages. I know we're part of the Northwest Educational Service District 189, that encompasses about 35 school districts, and there's kids that have been on campus and are actually going to school, K-1-2s, up in the northern part of the county area, heading up north. But I also know that right down south, there's schools that are closed and are already saying that they're not going to be open till semester. So that's the range we're working with, because again, a transmission is really, there's so many variables to this. And again, we're doing the best we can with the information we have for our Edmond students, our Edmonds kids. And right now, again, ask for your patience as we work to stage 1. We will get to stage 1. My hope is here very soon for these 163 kids over 10 campuses, as we move towards stage 2 at some point in time. It may not be middle of November if the cases keep rising. It may not be. That's our intent, but it may not be. We may be looking in 2 weeks and say, hey, we're not going to be able to get there because it's over 75 cases per 100,000. That leads us to go fully remote. So if we're close, again, it will not be our recommendation to do so. It will not be our recommendation to do so. Again, once we open up, we want to stay open. That's the goal. We don't want to have this accordion effect with families. That's even just difficult for everybody. So again, appreciate your patience. More information to come. I appreciate Harmony and your team in terms of the communication, and we hope to be able to send out more constant communication out to folks as well. So thank you, and thanks to the team for being here this evening.
Thank you. And just to recap all of your questions, and we are gathering them, and we will be updating our frequently asked question website. And so we appreciate everyone who shared their questions and comments tonight, and we will be gathering that data and making sure that we have that information available to you. So thank you all so much for joining tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.